Welcome to the One Advantage podcast, exploring the intersections of peer power, culture, and agility. Your hosts, Mike Richardson, Jason Richmond, and Leo Bottary, co-founders of the One Advantage community of practice and advantage peer groups. For more information, please visit us at the One Advantage podcast.
Hey everybody, we're back again for another episode of the One Advantage podcast, and we have a full house today. Unusually, we've got Leo here, we've got Jason here, we've got me here. It's amazing. How did that happen? We'll find out. We'll find out more about that in a moment, where everybody's been, what they've been up to, and how come they are able to be here with us today. We have a good one today, everybody. Been looking forward to this one. Career journeys are replacing career paths. You know, when I think about my own career, I think, what path? I don't remember there being a path. I don't really remember there being a plan. It just seemed to unfold. You know, that saying that we live life forwards and we understand it backwards. Now that I look back on 40 years, I kind of, oh yeah, I get what happened. I see how that unfolded. So we're going to discuss that a little bit more today, everybody. And the idea that career paths, you know, have typically been linear with a singular focus, but career journeys include a variety of assignments that might span functional areas or disciplines. The landscape of talent management, development, and career planning is shifting. What does it mean for you as an employer and an employee and as a leader? And as I said, we have a full house today with Jason, Leo, and myself here to discuss all of that. Let's find out, first of all, what you've all been up to. Leo, how come you're here? It's great to have you. We managed to pin you down. How's that happen?
You know, little shout out to Brian too. I feel like he says my last name better than I do. He says Leo Bottary. He's like, a lot of enthusiasm there. Wonderful. No, I'm actually, I feel like I've been spending a lot of time in Philadelphia recently. I just got back from there again last night. Of course, I come back, the day before the World Series starts, oh well. No, I've been really busy, out on the road. I'll be traveling again next week to South Bend, Indiana, and then I will be in Colorado and in Orlando the following week. So, cool. It's busy, but you know what? It beats the alternative. It's good.
Yeah, spreading the good word, no doubt, about everything peer innovation and other stuff. Yeah, awesome. Great stuff. Well, when you're in Colorado, watch out for the snow, because Jason just shared with me that he got snow. Jason, what have you been up to?
Yeah, well, the last couple of weeks, Mike, has been a whirlwind. It's been a United States tour. It seems like I've been coast to coast, doing a lot of different engagement workshops and seminars and executive retreats, around the power of culture. As a matter of fact, I've had a lot of conversations about what we're talking about today. Cool. Career pathing, career journey, developing. Yeah. How do you create the right environment for these leaders to be able to allow, to promote and allow employees within their organization to grow and to thrive. Yeah. And that's what it's all about is, career pathing and career journeys are about, the success and the growth and the ability for your workforce to thrive.
Yeah. And when I look at the three of us and I just think about our own career paths, journeys, whatever we want to call it. And I think about my own, for instance. In the last few weeks, I've done a webinar about advisory boards, because that became an important part of my career path. And in the next 2 weeks, I'm doing a webinar about peer groups, because that became a really important part of not only my career path, but of course, Leo's as well. So lots of exciting stuff going on, all about the peer-powered culture of agility, everybody, that we need to survive and thrive these days, not just in business, not just professionally, not just personally, but also in life, not least of all with our careers. So, Leo, when you're out and about and you're doing all your good work and you're interacting with so many different people, when you think about career paths, career journeys, I mean, how do you think about the whole topic of careers these days?
It's interesting. The lens that I have into it is less from, at least in the career pathing perspective, less in the work that I do with peer innovation and more with the work I do at Rutgers University. I teach a personal branding course to graduate students there. And some are graduate students who went straight from undergraduate to graduate. Other may have been in the workforce for 10 plus years. And it's fascinating to see people at all levels, in many respects, who almost see themselves like a victim in the workplace, like they're just looking for someone to hire them to do something and pay them money so that they can do what, they're not nearly as intentional or believe they can be as intentional as you might think with regard to what do I really love to do? Where can I add value? What do I want in my life? Not just what I have to accept and where things take me. And it's kind of interesting because when you hear the workplace, if you will, talk, leaders are talking about this, lack of talent out there, lack of ability to find great people, when I think it depends on kind of where you sit, because from my perspective, there's a lot of great talent out there. And I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast too, where we've got to use our imagination a little bit instead of being so unbelievably narrow and tight about what fits a specific role. There's a lot of people that can be successful at many of the available positions out there. And I think if we open our minds a little bit, I think from the employer side, that would be great. And I think from the employee side of things, the more specific, the more targeted and directed you can be, the more that you provide an ability for someone to really make a good choice about whether you're a good fit for their company.
Yeah, I really love that. And that idea of personal brand and how you over time sort of find your niche and your place and your voice and your reputation for the great work that you do kind of in your zone. And that's a clumsy way of saying what becomes, no doubt, your personal brand. And then the other thing that strikes me from what you said, Leo, is, of course, and we've touched upon this many times, more and more and more of your talent is not in your employees. It's in freelancers, gig workers, people who intentionally want to have a portfolio career, not a corporate career. They intentionally don't actually want to be employed as a typical employee. They want to be hired for sure, but they want to be self-employed with their own portfolio of activities. So lots to discover there. So Jason, what comes up for you when you think about this whole topic of careers?
Mike, I'm a reflective learner by nature, so I reflect on my own past experiences. When I was 25 years old, when my career started, I had no clue where I was going to go.
Oh, come on. So, you're older than that. Come on.
So at that point, I decided to move to Australia for 3 years. Right. And I think that experience, living in Australia, living in a different country, being 100% disconnected from my reality, really set the foundation for my passion and what I do in culture and development and leadership development and organizational development, human capital, right? And that personal experience. So when I talk about career pathing, when I think about this, when I talk about journeys, I kind of coined it called borderless careers. And I love the term borderless careers because if every leader, if every organization took a look at their workforce and eliminated the borders of opportunity. So many people are limited because they've got borders around them. If we can drop those borders, whether that means on a global basis, whether that means across the country, whether that means in the same office in different departments, whether that mean, lateral movements instead of up, right? You can coin the phrase borderless careers, but don't take your workforce and put borders around their opportunities. And I really believed in that from personal experience. And in today's work with the hybrid workforce, when you're talking about gig workers, I mean, it's even so much more important, to think borderless.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I really like that a lot. And, what does that mean for the employee? What does that mean for the employer? What does it mean for leaders? And, what strikes me there, what comes up for me is the concept of risk. Yep. Clearly, when you decided to up sticks and go to Australia for 3 years, I think you said age 25, that was a big risk.
Yeah.
And you had no guarantees that was going to play out. And yet looking back now, of course, that was so pivotal in the way that your career unfolded. Of course, Leo's taken big risks. I've taken big risks, not least of all, deciding to take the leap from the corporate world 20 years ago into nothing.
Yeah.
And, the more risk we're willing to take, the more reward can often show up. So how does risk factor into all of this, whether you're an employee or an employer or a leader? What's your reaction to the boundaryless idea, Leo? The borderless idea?
Let's face it. I think Jason, explained it well. I think that the relationship we have with our quote employer in the less traditional sense, like you talked about, is more of the person's thinking of their employer as their client, which can be a very healthy relationship. I think the other thing that came up that rang really loud and clear in the report, Jason, that you shared with us from Microsoft was this idea of people are just looking for every opportunity they can find to learn and grow. And if an organization is giving them those opportunities to learn and grow and be boundaryless, if you will, within a company, which I think is also quite possible, they will stay and be much more likely to be happier, engaged, and stay with that organization. And by the same token, employees out there are going to figure out what's right for me, what's going to give me that opportunity to constantly learn and grow and maybe stick my toes in the water in different, fields even. And I think that's what's exciting. And I think there's incredible possibilities that come from that.
Yeah. And I love the concept, Mike, of risk. I mean, when I made that choice, I bought a one-way ticket. So there was no return. And two, there's no cell phones, there's no communication. Long distance global calls were probably $20 a minute. The only way you communicate was with a fax machine. Right. So
dear mum.
Yeah. Right. So it truly is that
it's a different world today.
The world has changed so much, but yet the core concept of the methodology, the concept of thinking has not really changed. A scary thing for leaders. I was working with a HR group just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about, of course, talent recruitment, right, in this hybrid workforce, and we started working with that middle level leadership ranks within the organization, and what I brought to the table was this whole concept of, in the world we work in right now, and by the way, this is scary for some leaders. It's time for you to go re-recruit your employees.
Yeah.
Right? You have employees that have been with you 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, 12 years, right? That have fallen into a pattern, right? That's fallen into a routine, that's fallen into, task performance, results, activities, right? How often has your leader come to you and actually re-recruited you, sold you on the organization, really dug into what your interests were? And I think that's a key component of this of this career pathing, right? Of this career journey. How do we know what individuals' career path could be if we don't re-recruit them? And I think that's a critical step that's being missed today.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think what the dots that join up for me is, when you may have taken the leap to a portfolio career and gone independent like all of us have, and you really then are in the business of trying to zero in on your passion, your purpose, your brand, your niche, and really finding that zone in which you can be, at your best and make some money and, be having fun. Yeah. For me, it seems that because portfolio careers are increasingly prevalent and increasingly an option for all employees at some stage of their life, we've got to get better and better and better at providing employees that same pathway to be pursuing their purpose, their passion, their self-actualization, as it were, as fully in a corporate career as they could in a portfolio career.
Correct.
And so more than ever before, how are we as leaders going to open up those pathways, those journeys of that possibility for employees to really, really, really find their groove with the purpose and passion that they seek. And obviously, we've always thought that way in business, but maybe not as acutely as we now need to. What do you think, Leo?
I think that both sides have to be more intentional about it. When you look at Gen Zs and you look at millennials in particular, and obviously they dominate the workforce today, the idea of annual performance reviews and all this kind of stuff is out the window. I mean, you've got to have it. It's got to be an ongoing conversation. It has to be a psychologically safe place where you can actually speak with really anyone in your organization about your career, not just your job. And I think this becomes really, really important that those conversations to be open. You're not dealing with someone who has a self-interest in keeping you exactly where you are because you're so helpful to them in that moment and things like that. So, and conversely, how many times, and I'm sure, countless people out there who are listening to this podcast have experienced someone coming to them and saying, I am leaving the organization because in my new job, I'm going to get to do this and this, without ever either side not knowing, you could have probably done that here if we just had a conversation about it, if you just asked, or maybe if I just asked, right? And I think that this is where these conversations become very powerful. And because people feeling that sense of belonging becomes huge.
Yeah. You have thoughts on that, Jason?
No, it is a two-way street. I mean, like Leo said, I mean, it's there's responsibility on an individual contributor. There's a responsibility on that direct supervisor, leader, manager, and there's a responsibility of the organization. Culturally, you got to have a culture that allows that type of safety that Leo's talking about, and that type of openness, for career development, career pathing, career growth.
So where do you think this is all going? I mean, it feels like we're in the middle of a transition right now. We're only really just emerging from COVID. That has put everybody's heads in a different place. We're in the middle of a pivot. Where do you think we're pivoting to? Where do you think we will land 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now around the whole concept of careers and pathways and journeys? Where do you think it's going, Jason?
I believe it's going more laterally than horizontally.
Okay.
I believe in all my work and all my engagements with individual contributors and stuff, the value of experience is at a much higher level than the value of title.
Yeah.
And our workforce is looking for that engaging experience, to be engaged, to enjoy what they're doing, to have purpose in what they're doing. So I think we're all going to land with more of an experiential workplace than ever before. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think our up and coming workforce, our future leaders are much more experience driven than they are title or position driven.
Yeah, and I suspect, like we see in so many other walks of life, that the time frames are shrinking. Right? We used to think in terms of, well, we'll put you in this job, get 3 to 5 to 7 years of experience, and then we'll look at maybe the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Yeah. Now it's like, hey, I've been in this job for 6 months. Yeah. I'm ready. I'm ready for what's next. Right?
Yeah. There's a lot of companies out there right now that are taking specific segments of, whether they call them high potentials or cohort groups or whatever, and they're deliberately making sure that they're in a new job role every 12 to 18 months.
Right.
And I'm seeing that trend increase quite a bit, quite substantially.
Yeah, the balance of power is going to continue to shift. Yep. It's going to continue to go in the direction that it's going. And anyone sitting around waiting for the workforce of 2019 and earlier, good luck with that. Yeah. I mean, really, you've got to just really be mindful. And, Mike, you talk about this all the time. It is about being agile. It's about being adaptable. It's about recognizing that there's a bit of a new world order in many respects. And I think it's good news for employees. I think it's good news for people who are seeking and can really believe they can pursue their passion and seek out a career that's best for them. And when they do that, they're actually going to deliver better value to anyone who they serve, whether that's a portfolio arrangement or whether they are an employee of a company. I mean, Jason kept talking about the word value, and I think about it from that perspective, right? It isn't, what degree you have. I'm asked all the time, will getting my master's degree help me earn me more money? The answer is no. However, will the education you get from your master's degree put you in a position where you could add greater value to where you are? And can that help you? No question about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny. Here I am, just sort of passing through the 40th year of my career. And I remember 40 years ago when I joined my first corporation, which was Shell International. Like many of my colleagues who joined that same corporation, I thought I was joining for life, a lifelong career. And indeed, many of my colleagues did. And 3, 4, 5 years later, I had sort of woken up to the idea that actually that wasn't me, not least of all because I didn't foresee myself staying in a technical career, which it would have been. But I've mentioned this before, and I think back in those days, one of the biggest fears that we would have is losing your job, right? Because you are so attached to this concept of a lifelong career. Obviously, a disruption to that was huge and devastating. Whereas now, my kids who are plus or minus 30, I mean, it's like they. As far as I can tell, they don't have any fear of, job hopping, as it were. So what? If I join a startup and it doesn't work, well, no problem. I'll just do the next thing. I'm not worried about finding the next thing, because I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, Leo, you when you say the shift of power, it's sort of like the playing field is leveling back in the employee's favor, where now, on a supply and demand basis, the talent supply side, the employee, the individual person, has more room to maneuver, more options, more places they can go to find, gainful income generation than ever before. With the world being so flat now that we even see people doing that on a nomadic basis, right? They don't really live in any one place. They are all over the world all the time.
Yep, sure.
That's right. By the way, I just want to mention how impressed I am that you can remember anything that happened 40 years ago, but I can't. Not at all. I have no clue. I don't know what I was doing then.
It's only by looking at photographs. Like, oh yeah, I have a vague recollection of that.
And on these sepia tone photographs that you're looking at, yeah.
So what do we think leaders need to do, Jason? What do leaders need to do more of, do less of, to navigate this new paradigm, really, of what careers are and how careers unfold and where careers, shape up?
Thanks for asking that. Wednesday, I was a guest on Chris Starkey's podcast. And he has a podcast about 3 big things. And we were talking about this particular subject, and he asked my opinion based on experience and based on engagement with organizations and so forth. What are the 3 things, preventing, career advancement, promotion, individual contributors, growth, those types of things. Right. So we focused on the 3 things that subconsciously or not unconsciously leaders do to prevent that type of evolution and growth. And the first one I said was complacency. Leaders, managers, the status quo, complacent, things that seem to be going okay, that type of thing. The second one was the lack of talent development, the lack of really encouraging and pushing and striving for your workforce to self-develop, get education, and do those types of things. And the third one, and probably the most controversial one, is individual egos within the organization are actually preventing the individual contributors to strive. And so, not so much what they can do, but those are 3 things that they need to stop doing, right? Don't let their ego get in the way. Start developing their talent and become more innovative.
Yeah. It's such a great point. Go ahead, Leo. Did you have something to add?
I do. This idea of not letting your ego in the way can really serve you well. It's one thing I kind of, joked before that, hey, if you're looking at, wanting a world pre 2020, forget it, right?
Yeah.
And just, but not to be glib about that. But the reality is that it is a big shift for leaders who have been doing things a certain way for decades to now all of a sudden feel comfortable with people working at home or hybrid and all that. And I think that's a fair point. The interesting thing, though, is that if you flip this a little bit and you get leaders to be a little vulnerable and ask for the help of their employees to say, when I'm reaching out to you, or I'm not trying to micromanage you, I'm trying to understand this is a big shift for me too. So as long as you can be proactive in communicating with me and tell me if I'm micromanaging you, tell me if, then let's have that dialogue. And I think both of us will get better at this together. And I think that's okay. And I think employees would appreciate that level of vulnerability and honesty from their leader, which is like, it isn't that I don't trust you. I'm just having a hard time, kind of making the adjustment. Let's do this together. Let's help me make that happen.
Sure.
Yeah, that was your productivity paranoia thing, Jason, that I think we talked about last time. What just popped for me was I was doing a strategic retreat recently with a client. And for many, many understandable reasons, they had always put culture, when you do the classic SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, they had always put culture in the strengths column. Understandably so. They have a beautiful facility. There's all kinds of amenities in the facility for the employees, with the sort of kitchen area and the relaxation room and even there's some games and fun things that you can do. And they do lots of, good stuff like beach barbecues and all that fun stuff. And they'd had culture in the strengths column for many years, almost unquestioned. And then they did an extensive employee survey. And the results they got back were shocking. And their faces just dropped. Now, they did it earlier this year, so we're still coming off the back of COVID and all of that paradigm shift. But, I really just had to face them down in the session and say, so are you ready to move that culture item from the strengths column to the weaknesses column? And get real about the fact that because maybe it's COVID, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, but it is no longer a strength. And you are going to need to hit that really hard to get it back into the strengths column quickly before it not only is a weakness, it becomes a threat to your future. And they really, wow, that was a shock to the system, and they really stepped forward and said, right, let's get busy, and obviously we did. So I think perhaps more and more organizations need to be very careful that they may have had culture in the strengths column for a long time, and if they haven't done a rigorous employee survey recently, they may not get that shock to the system that they really need.
Correct.
If we just change the word culture to relationships, we could understand it a lot better.
Yeah.
We could look at culture and we're going to check off the box and we're going to move on to the other things. That in relationships, you better not be checking off the box at all. It is a daily activity. It is a daily thing to pay attention to. And, when we don't, it goes by the wayside.
Yeah. Jason, any final thoughts for our listeners on this whole topic of careers and where it's all going?
My final thoughts, I'll go back to my opening thoughts, in regards to retaining your top talent and recruiting top talent. You got to have a mindset of borderless career development.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And rip down the borders that you put around your employees.
Yeah. These false borders, right? Well, maybe they were relevant 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago.
They're not today.
They're just not. Leo, final thoughts?
Yeah, just for employees, I think in particular, and for anyone out there, be intentional about what you want, not just what you don't want. Yeah. And, if you do that, and if you kind of prepare yourself and reflect and get clarity on what that looks like for you, I think there's a lot of success in your future.
Yeah, it was interesting just thinking back to that thing I was saying about that client I was working with, and they were looking at the results of this survey, and they started to sort of dissect the math, and they started to like challenge, the ratings and all of that kind of stuff. And I said, hey, time out. I said, if this was they'd done an employee survey, right? I said, hey, if this was a client survey, this would be a crisis, wouldn't it? Right? If this was a survey of your clients and they were scoring you like that, that would be a crisis, because you could see revenue disappearing in the future. And I said, hey, guess what? These are your clients. Your employees are your clients. That's the way you have to think about it going forwards. And we're really in service of our employees, our workforce, whether they are employees or they are freelancers. We're in service of them, having the same level of passion and purpose and fulfillment, whether they're in a corporate career or a portfolio career. So that's something to think about, everybody, whether you're an employer, an employee, or a leader out there. It's been great to have a full house here today. Thanks for being here, Leo. Thanks for being here, Jason. That's it, everybody. We will see you at the next One Advantage podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to the One Advantage podcast. If you liked this episode, please consider helping us by rating us wherever you listen, spreading the word, having us as a guest on your podcast or webinar, and mentioning us in social media. Find us at the One Advantage podcast, where you can get more information about us and this episode. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to more great episodes to come.